Well, good morning, everybody. We'll we will get started here right away. It's 11 o'clock. Welcome to everybody. I think we've got over 100 registrants for this. I think we're getting close to that. I see a lot of people joining, so thank you very much for joining us this morning for part one of our webinar series here this week. My name is Ian McGillivray. I'm one of the three hosts. I might get Roberta and Kevin to also put their cameras on and wave as well. They're joining us here too. So welcome to part one of our webinar series. Hey guys, there we are. We're ready to roll. Just some quick little bit of housekeeping before we proceed here. We've got a lot of material to cover today, very diverse audience. That's why we broke this into three, but that means we'll have lots of content to go through. So we'll get through this as fast as we can. We'll leave as much time at the end for some Q&A. This session is being recorded, including the Q&A at the end. And so if we'll definitely be done our content well before the end of the hour, but if we have some good questions at the end, we can certainly go past noon. We'll signal at noon if anybody needs to leave, but if we still got some questions, we're happy to stick around and answer them, and those will all be recorded so we can you can see the answers if you have to leave at noon. You can submit questions as we go here. We'll probably try and leave most of them to the end, but just feel free to queue them up. There's a chat feature at the top of your window that you can do that, and the recording will be distributed to everybody at the end of this session. So we've got lots joining on. That's great. All right, well, we'll get going. We've got a lot to go. Quick disclaimer here, basically don't use this as a substitute for any of this as a substitute for advice from either one of our representatives directly or any IAQ HVAC or engineer, HVAC engineer. That all of your facilities are unique. There's many different circumstances, and you should really have a qualified professional before you make any significant changes, and that is our disclaimer. So this is the first in three-part series that we are conducting this month. This first one is today. We've got next, we'll be going over some of the high-level principles today, and then they get more technical as we go here. So next week we'll all be around optimizing HVAC and filtration systems and get a little bit more technical. And then number three on January 27th, certainly a very hot topic these days, portable room air purifiers. And there's lots to learn about them. And so we've got an entire hour dedicated just to that on the 27th. So our presenters today, myself and Roberta McGillivray, our CEO, and Kevin Delahunt, our Senior Technical Advisor. Roberta's got, we're 20 years in the business and in this industry, and if you think that's a long time, Kevin's got over 40. So we've got some really good horsepower here this morning to bring a significant amount of knowledge to everybody this morning. So here we go. But just a little bit quickly about us as a company. BG, we are a Western Canadian company. We've been family owned and operated since 1968. Been around for, I guess, 53 years now. We're the largest independent IAQ and filtration company in Western Canada with a couple hundred employees across the west here. We're headquartered here in Edmonton with our manufacturing distribution center, and then we have 7 branches across Western Canada. We are partially Indigenous owned, so we have an equity partner at Fort Mackay First Nation. And indoor air quality is our passion. We love this subject. We've got hundreds and hundreds of years of experience collectively in our team on this, and certainly with the pandemic, this has become a very hot topic, and we are happy to help anybody in any way we can. So just to quickly, our perspective on this topic in particular and what we bring to the table. So our purpose as a company is to safely deliver clean, healthy indoor air environments, because clean air really matters to, in this case, the health of our occupants. We combine that with we have 2 core values. We have 3 core values of the company, but 2 of them are be the expert and together we're better, and those fit together. Our approach to this is we work together with our customers, and the be the expert part, we share our knowledge all the time. We work with our customers. We conduct training seminars with our customers. We like to share everything that we know and that we learn. We've got lots of people out doing great work, and we love to share that information. As COVID has raged on here for now a couple, coming up on a couple of years, I guess, clean air and healthy buildings has become so important, especially as the realization that this thing was airborne. So we're bringing 53 years of experience to that, and in particular with schools and school boards. We work with over 120 school boards across Western Canada and all their unique challenges. So we've seen a lot of your facilities. We work in a lot of your facilities all the time. And so that's sort of our perspective and what we bring to this topic. So with those introductions and housekeeping out of the way, I'm going to turn it over first to Roberta, and we'll get going with our content today. So over to you, Roberta.
Thank you very much, Ian. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. And as we get started, we're, like Ian said, this 3-part webinar is going to cover a lot of ground, and we know we've got a great group and a lot of diverse experience. So it's really important that we get grounded in understanding indoor air quality and the effects that play on the level of indoor air quality. And so if we think about outside and we think about air quality, I think we could all generally agree when we look at the left-hand side of this picture that that's a poor air quality day. We can see it, we can feel it, and we can smell it. And when we look on the right-hand side of this picture, that's a good air quality day, or at least a lot better than what we're seeing on the left-hand side. But one of the things we need to think about, and this is where we spend a lot of our time, is thinking about those contaminants that are happening in a space or in the environment that you can't necessarily see, and that can still cause issues for a certain part of the population or for the population as a whole. And as we quickly turn our focus today to indoor air quality, and we know that 90% of our time is spent indoors, and probably in the last couple of weeks in Western Canada, with it being so cold, we were probably spending 100% of our time indoors. We know that this classroom may look really healthy and well lit and a great learning environment for students, but we really need to think about those thousands of hours that a child spends in a classroom every year, and also think about those teachers and administrators that are spending even more time every year in schools and classrooms, and how we protect them, create a safe and productive environment for them to carry on their mission of learning. So we need to really think about all the effects on indoor air quality, and I'm sure these are things that you are all thinking about every single day as you're helping increase the level of productivity and safety in your schools. So it's thinking about that outside environment and the climate that is happening. It's thinking about the activities of our neighbors surrounding our schools. We need to think about our infrastructure, how our buildings are built, the materials used, the fixtures and the furnishings involved, and then of course of our occupants who, through what they bring into the school, as well as the activities that they're conducting, can cause effect on the indoor air quality. And we really need to focus on those common contaminants that are happening in the air that necessarily we don't see, such as influenza, cold, and of course viruses, which we're spending a lot of our time focusing on these days, smoke, mold, odors, other fine particulates like bacteria and volatile organic compounds and gases, and allergens. So why is this important to your school? So the EPA has said good IAQ contributes to a favorable environment for students, performance of teachers and staff, and a sense of comfort, health, and well-being. These elements combine to assist a school in its core mission of educating children. And there's been a number of studies done that in order to educate our children, we need to make sure that we obviously teach them well, but that they have an environment to learn well in. And so we know through the study done by the impact of green buildings on cognitive function that if you have good IAQ, it's going to provide a positive correlation to improve cognitive function, reduce absenteeism, and improve overall health. And if you have poor IAQ, we've seen in other studies that that can increase health risks for asthma, headaches, learning difficulties, and can increase the chance of transmission of viruses and pathogens. And so as most of our days and conversations and focus are consumed with COVID-19, the other thing that has become very apparent is that this virus is aerosolized, and that is agreed by the World Health Organization, ASHRAE, the CDC, the ECDC, and Health Canada. And what they know is this virus can spread through poorly ventilated and crowded indoor settings because of its aerosol nature. And it can remain suspended in air and travel farther than just that conversational distance that we've been focusing on of the 6 feet, and can actually transmit even to long range distances. And so you take those effects of indoor air quality that we've talked about, and you couple it with the nature of this virus, and you look at the obstacles in front of us with the state of where our schools are at today. We have many different ages of schools, and when they were originally engineered, they may have been only engineered for occupant comfort and not necessarily for that healthy indoor air quality that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. They were engineered to a minimum acceptable ventilation and filtration standards. And what we're going to talk to today is what experts are saying needs to be the optimal ventilation and filtration standards for schools at this time. A lot of focus was put around energy efficiency, which required us to really tighten our buildings so it was less costly and less use of energy to heat and cool and condition our buildings. And of course, we all know the fiscal constraints that schools are under, which may have led to some deferred maintenance, which over time reduces the overall system performance. And we also know that schools are not necessarily being used the same way that they were intended. We know that class sizes are bigger, and we know that there's a number of other functionalities or activities that are happening in schools that weren't necessarily intended when they were first built. So the challenge we face going forward is to move from this acceptable standard to a healthy standard for these indoor air environments. So there's a lot going on, and there's a lot that we need to think about. But the good news is that if we take care of the virus and the contaminant of concern, which is COVID-19, we can also take care of all those other common contaminants in the air, and we can create a healthy and productive school environment for years to come. And so as we've talked about the effects of indoor air quality, now we get to talk about, so how do we improve indoor air quality in our schools today? And so indoor air quality is a really critical layer to this Swiss cheese concept that people have been talking about. And it's all of these different defense mechanisms that we can use to mitigate and prevent the spread of coronavirus. So if we think of Swiss cheese with the holes in it, and we think of each one of these mitigating strategies such as physical distancing, hand hygiene, masks, staying home if you're sick. Of course, not all of these are going to be 100% foolproof, but if we put them all together, what we can do is provide a really important defense mechanism to keep kids in school, being as productive as possible, and using this strategy not only in schools but as everyone returns back to buildings in the future. And so what we're focusing on today is that blue layer of cheese, which is increasing ventilation, increasing as much outdoor air as possible, and improving the level of air filtration in buildings. Here's a really great picture that again depicts that concept we're talking about with the virus being aerosolized. So if we look at the two students on the left who are having a conversation, they're possibly within 6 feet. what we would say the mitigating strategies today are, well, make sure you're wearing masks, keep your distance as much as possible, and follow proper hygiene. What we haven't been spending as much time focusing on is, as these students are talking for a long period of time and in maybe not such a well ventilated space, is that those aerosolized virus particles can remain suspended. It can travel to longer ranges. And so if we look at the teacher on the right, that teacher may also be at risk to getting infected if one of these students is carrying the virus at this time. And another way to show this is this simulation that I will show. We love videos. We love the fact that pictures paint 1,000 words. And so this shows the same concept when someone is coughing inside a poorly ventilated space.
About 10 people in an enclosed space the size of a classroom. A person coughs once and spreads about 100,000 droplets. Large droplets are shown in blue and green. Most of these fall to the ground within 1 minute. But the microdroplets, shown in red, continue to drift. This simulation uses only microdroplets. 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, 20 minutes later, the microdroplets are still floating in place.
So what that really shows is, how much those droplets have remained suspended in space in just 20 minutes in those poorly ventilated spaces. So the key point here is, while we still do not know exactly what level of contamination presents the greatest risk of infection, we know that exposure increases as a function of higher concentration and longer time. And so when we think about those poorly ventilated spaces where many people gather, we focus into our schools, and we have a number of areas of high risk, such as classrooms, meeting rooms, shared workspaces, lunchrooms, locker rooms, and other common areas in that space. And so to deal with those high risk areas, there's two concepts that are really important here. What we need to do is increase the ventilation as much as possible, which means diluting that concentration of contaminants by replacing the dirty air with clean air. And then number two, improving the filtration. So as we take that dirty air out of a space, that we put that through a higher efficiency filter that can filter out those contaminants and provide clean air that can be reintroduced and recirculated into the space. So again, we love our videos, and here is a great video from our friends at Purifil and Madison Indoor Air Quality Hygiene that can really show these two concepts of ventilation and filtration being combined to protect against viruses.
We now know that COVID-19 is spread by airborne particles. One of the challenges of providing a hygienic indoor environment is that infectious airborne particles are typically smaller than the eye can see. Here, we help visualize how infectious diseases like COVID-19 can spread from a single contagious individual. A simple cough or sneeze from that infected person can expel thousands of droplets into the air. Shown here is the red particles. The virus travels within the airway from the individual and into the air return vent. When premium filters like MERV 13 are used, the majority of those particles are trapped in the filter and not recirculated into the room. As the air passes multiple times through the filter, the number of virus particles drop dramatically each time. Standalone air scrubbers can even have a greater impact on the indoor air hygiene, as the molecular filtration and proximity to occupants can increase the capture rate and reduce the risk of exposure to the other occupants. One of the most effective ways to provide clean air to indoor spaces is to bring in outside air. Rooftop DOAS units bring in fresh outside air to flush recirculated air from an indoor space. Introducing additional fresh air through DOAS or dedicated outdoor air systems can serve to dilute the infected particles with additional fresh air, which does not contain the infectious particles. Depending on your particular application, one or all of these methods can have a dramatic impact on reducing the spread of infection through the airborne pathways.
So just to reiterate a few of those key concepts that we saw in this video is how we achieve ventilation in the building is through that mechanical ventilation. And if we can increase as much, bringing in as much outside air as possible, we increase that level of clean air coming into the space. We can also look at what we like to call natural ventilation. So if you do have the opportunity where your schools have the ability to open their windows and keep their doors open, I know it's tough to do in this cold weather, but that is another way that we can bring in more clean air into this space to achieve the acceptable or the optimal ventilation standard. And from the filtration perspective, again, using the filtration that is in the HVAC system, making sure that it's upgraded and is performing as best as possible is another additive measure to the ventilation to bring in clean air into the space. And like they said, if you can't achieve that optimal clean air through the ventilation and the HVAC filtration, then you can supplement with those portable room air purifiers. And like Ian said, our core value of being the expert, he's going to share with you those leading experts that we've been following that very much have the consistent message and directive that we've been sharing in these first few slides. We'll get into this a little bit deeper now. So over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Roberta. Yeah, so we'll shift gears here into really the recommended strategies of how we can optimize our buildings and the technology that we have available to us in our buildings, since we can't open windows all the time. But we do have some really good tools, including in schools. So I'll start. This is a fantastic model we found that's actually been customized specifically for schools. So Harvard University has an excellent institute they call the Healthy Buildings Institute. And they do tons of research on indoor air quality and building systems and how to keep indoor spaces healthy. So they've actually customized sort of a version of their healthy buildings approach specifically for schools. So any of you that have not seen this, it's an excellent resource. Great information, research, guidance, a bunch of free tools that they've made available to help you in this journey. So it's a great resource to check out. We really like this one for its framework on the left. It's very simple. Of course, there's lots of complexity under each of these layers, but a simple model of sort of 1, 2, 3. So increasing ventilation, increasing filtration efficiency, and then supplementing with portable room air cleaners. And so we love the model. There's one key concept that I want to highlight, however, and this is best practice for indoor air quality, HVAC systems, and the fellow who runs the Healthy Buildings Institute at Harvard, he's in a recent academic journal that's been well peer reviewed. So he published this quote, and I want to make sure we just emphasize this point. So to reduce the risk of far-field airborne virus transmission, engineers and infectious disease specialists suggest 4 to 6 clean air changes per hour. And that clean air changes per hour concept will be a theme we carry the rest of today and through these webinars. But the key here is that those 4 to 6 air changes can be achieved through any combination of the following, which are all additive. So outdoor airs, bring in outdoor air, recirculated air filtered through high efficiency filters, and we'll talk more about this MERV 13 and later today. And then passage of air through portable air cleaners as a supplement. If we can't get enough air changes, we can't get to that 4 to 6 clean air changes from number 1 and number 2, then we supplement with number 3. So again, the key here is this is additive. You should go after this challenge of air changes per hour in a layered approach. So and get yourself to the 6 air changes per hour through a combination of any of these means. And we're finding this is one of the most misunderstood principles in this battle right now. So just a really, really critical point. So flipping over, that's Harvard and generally indoor air quality best practices. But let's talk about ASHRAE. The real authority on this stuff, at least in North America, an organization called ASHRAE, the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. I know we've got some of their members on the call today. We've got engineers on this call. But this is the body that sets the standards for building codes for the HVAC industry, and so everything flows here. So we want to just make sure the guidance that we're providing in the Harvard model is consistent with what ASHRAE is saying. ASHRAE has ventilation standards that they publish and they update on a regular basis. They have for many, many years. When the pandemic hit, there were some key changes. They struck they called the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force, and this guidance. There's some important updates in this guidance that made some changes to their regular standards that are really critical. And I pulled a quote here specifically from Dr. Bill Banflip, who's the chair of the Epidemic Task Force. And one key change that's not consistent with the regular standards of 62.1 is that we know for sure that 62.1 is not the level of indoor air quality control that it takes to significantly reduce airborne infectious disease. So the air, in particular, the air changes per hour in the ventilation standard are not sufficient, and the level of filtration is not high enough. So we actually, interestingly enough, here in Alberta, and I know we've got some folks from other provinces, but we actually got some recent clarifying guidance, specifically that Dr. Banflip provided for Alberta schools. So I'm going to highlight, there's been a couple of letters, and some of you on the call may have seen these already. I'm going to highlight the second letter, which actually just was written last Friday by the chair of the Epidemic Task Force. And there's some key things in here he was writing to essentially clarify. And so again, this was written for Alberta schools. So number one is, we need to check systems to maximize ventilation. So any outside air, the more outside air we can bring in from our HVAC systems, we need to do that. We need to upgrade to MERV 13 filters. So recurring themes here. And this one, I'll read most of this paragraph because it's important. So even when the above two, so even when minimum outdoor air requirements are met and our recirculated air is filtered by MERV 13s, the total clean air delivery rate to most of the spaces does not reach recommended levels and should be supplemented by in-room air cleaners. So, and the goal is to get to 6 air changes per hour of combination outdoor and filtered air. So the guidance we shared earlier from Harvard, that triangle model, is very consistent with the guidance from ASHRAE here. So again, we'll leave with this principle of 1 + 2 + 3. So those 3 measures to get to our 6 air changes per hour. So very consistent with ASHRAE. So back to our video again, we talked about the combination of ventilation, filtered air, and HEPA air purifiers, and they're all additive to get us to 6. We want to target to 6. So the guidance is pretty clear on all that. If you want any more, there's actually I put a link here to a podcast episode that Dr. Banflip goes into more detail about all this and the 62.1 standards. So, okay, at that point, we're going to shift gears here. I'm going to pass it over to Kevin Delahunt, and he's going to take us through the beginnings of our roadmap to how we go about doing all this stuff and getting to our 6 air changes per hour. Over to you, Kevin. And
Thank you.
Just take control there of the webinar, and you can.
I think I do have control.
Okay, good.
You got to love modern technology. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's great to see so many people interested in this topic, and it certainly is a topic of interest. I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into the inverted pyramid because I really like the setup here. It's very simple, as Ian said, and the thing is, it's also a hierarchy. You're looking at doing step 1 first, step 2, and then step 3. So let's go a little bit deeper here. Increased ventilation rate. This has already been said, but it's worth repeating, is that increase outside air as much as possible. We have to bring in as much outside air, and we have to verify systems. So the very first part of that inverted pyramid is these two statements. What are your systems doing? What are your mechanical systems doing? And in good cases, a lot of school districts won't have the expertise within their house, and they might have to reach out to a mechanical engineer or an HVAC professional to evaluate just what amount of mechanical error you're bringing into that space. It's very important. You need to know exactly where you sit before you move on to even the second and the third item. One of the other guidance that's out there, and you probably have heard this if you've been on any webinars like I have been, but doing purge cycles. So morning cycle before people show up. The recommendation is 3 air changes an hour. So if you're looking at 6 air changes an hour, that would be run your systems for half an hour. And it would be the same for the end of the day purge. And the end of the day, we're talking about the last person that leaves the building. So in non-pandemic times, there was lots of activities in schools at night, volleyball games and bingo and what have you. So it's really when the last person leaves the building, and that could be at 4:30 or it could be at 11 o'clock at night. Extremely important. System hygiene is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. And I have sat in a lot of webinars, like you guys have probably sat in a lot of webinars, but system hygiene is extremely important. And NADCA, which is the agency that for the Duct Cleaners Association, has done a lot of research in just the effects of a dirty coil on airflow. And they, in some instances, show a 54% reduction in airflow just because the cooling or the coils are full of dirt. And in other presentations I've done or I do, the coil becomes a pretty good filter after it starts to load up with dirt like that. So the odd part, it's not designed as a filter. It needs to be cleaned if you want to maintain the airflow through your system. I'm going to look at a little bit of history now because as I think Ian and Roberta talked about ASHRAE, the ventilation guide for acceptable indoor air quality. The current one is 62.1 to 2019. There's been probably a dozen versions of that over time. And when I'm giving this talk, in a lot of cases, I'm talking to individuals that have a single building built at a specific period of time. So we're talking about, well, what design level was that built to? When I look at a group of buildings such as Calgary Board of Education, sorry to pick on you, Marina, but I'm gonna. You have buildings that were built in the 1900s right up to 2020. And what I'm trying to say here, it's a moving target. If you had a building built, prior to 1973, they were probably built at 30 CFM per person. But if you had buildings built in 1981, they were only built to 5 CFM per person. And the bottom line is we can't get the mechanical ventilation up to 6 air changes an hour, especially in those buildings that were built in the 80s. And if I look at CBE and just the growth of Calgary during that period, a lot of buildings were built during that time. So we need to look at alternate solutions. And going back to the epidemic task force and what Ian was just writing about is that even in 2019, if you're building a building and it's designed to the minimum, and again, I'm going to talk about minimum here, you would only design the mechanical system to 2.7 air changes an hour. How do you get to that 6 air changes an hour? And that's where we're heading here. And there'll be more about that in episode 2 next January 20. So next Thursday, we'll talk more about that in detail. So the next line item in the inverted pyramid is increased filter efficiency. And again, this is one near and dear to our heart. And I'll go back to 62.1, 2019. In it, it recommends a MERV 8 filter. So a lot of you would... if I said what filters were designed in your system or you're using in the system, you'd be using a lot of MERV 8 filters. And prior to 2016, it was MERV 6 filters. And we're going to talk a little bit about this later today, but they're inferior at stopping the particle in the SARS-CoV-2 virus size range. Very, very inefficient at that. So, and then we jump to the epidemic task force when they come out with MERV-13. And I bet you a lot of people in the room, you know, prior to 2020 would have a hard time understanding exactly where they came up with MERV, what the number is. Well, if you are interested and you have some time to do a little bit of reading, it comes from ASHRAE Standard 52.2/2017, which is the method of testing air filters. So they put air filters in a duct and they look at how a filter, what's the filter's ability to remove particles of a specific size, again, very important, and also its resistance to airflow. Two very important elements in filter performance. And if you're looking at, again, filters, MERV today is 1 to 16. Prior to 2016, there was the HEPA filters were included at 17 and 20. And again, this is a hierarchy of filters: poor, good, better, best. So MERV 1 to 4. I don't even know if we, manage or manufacture or sell filters in that MERV rating. And then medium, pleated filters, high efficiencies, usually extended, and then get into the HEPA filters, which we won't talk about today anyway. So why again MERV 13? Everyone's shouting from the rooftops, you got to put MERV 13 in it. Well, the reason is that we know that SARS-CoV-2, it's a particle, and it is airborne, and it will behave like particles in that size range will. And if we look at the dynamics of a particle in that size range, and SARS-CoV-2 is in a very size range depending on it's enveloped in, I guess is the term. So anywhere from less than 1 micron in size to 5 microns in size. So if you look at this, again, particles in that 1 micron and smaller really don't settle out of the air. They stay airborne, and similar to the animation that we had, you see those red particles that just over that 20-minute period of time didn't drop. Gravity has little to no effect on those particles, basically because of the small size. And we look at this chart here, again, it just, we talked about concentration and time. Well, the concentration, if we look at particles in that size range, sub 2.5 microns in size, make up about 99.5% of all the particles in a given space, whether it's a room or a cubic foot of air. So the majority of particles is well below your site threshold, and the majority of particles of the of a virus-sized particles would be in that size range. This is a concept that I really like, and it might be something you probably haven't heard, because I haven't heard anyone else talk about it on any of the webinars I'm in. But at the end of the day, and again, why MERV 13? At the end of the day, we're really concerned about what we're returning to the space, because a lot of the systems that you have probably run on 90–95% recirculation. So you want to stop as much particulate and as much virus-sized particles before it returns to the space. So if you look here, if you can see anyway that a MERV 8 is only 55% efficient on a specific particle size. But that means it's penetrating 44% of the particulate load. That's quite a high load. If we go to MERV 13, it's now, what's that, almost approximately 90% on the same load and only penetrating 10%. So we look at strictly at penetration. A MERV 13 is 450% better at removing particles or eliminating the particulate load from re-entering the space, just because it's that much more efficient. So that's one of the reasons why you're going to MERV 13. It really does a great job. Another issue that I I don't see when people talk about filtration, especially high efficiency filtration, we don't talk about the system efficiency. Rarely in a school setting or commercial setting is one filter in a filter bank. Usually it's a series of anywhere from 2 to maybe 200. And it's really important that we look at not just the filter efficiency, but the overall system efficiency. How efficient is 200 filters in one filter bank? Does it still meet that MERV 13, if that was the MERV 13 filter that's put in there? And in most cases, it's very difficult to do. It's not that easy. It has to fit. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't filter. And in this case, there's some dynamics of filters that are concepts of filters that we all need to be aware of when we look at a filter bank, especially one as large as 100 or 200 filters. Air doesn't want to pass through a filter. It's like water to find the path of least resistance. And as we increase in efficiency, we go from MERV 8 to MERV 13. It's even more important that the filters are really tight and have a good holding apparatus. And fit, in some cases, can be more than efficiency, important than in efficiency. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't filter again. So extremely important. Now, another issue, okay, SARS-CoV-2 is airborne and it's viable and it gets back into a filter system. There's a very good chance that we have to assume that the filter is now contaminated with a live, viable virus. How long, we don't know. It hasn't really been tested, but we need to consider that whoever's going up to work, maintain, service, replace, has to have that understanding that the filter could be contaminated. So it's very important that we look at it and train our individuals in knowing how to deal with that problem. So they need to have the proper PPE when they go up: gloves, coveralls, masks, sometimes even breathing apparatus with a HEPA mask. You need to have that. You just don't go up in a t-shirt and take the filter out. So one of the other things we really promote is training. Air filtration is now a service and it's a specialty item. You need to understand what you're doing to go work on filters. So the National Air Filtration Association has an excellent program. The NAFA certified technician will train individuals on all aspects of filtration service and maintenance. Get your people trained. We're happy to help out or reach out directly to NAFA and they can, or we can point you in the right direction. But it's a really good certification. All our guys that do work now are certified to the NCT program. And we'll talk more about like bypass and fit in seminar number 2. We're going to get really in depth on filtration and what have you. So I think it's now over to Ian.
Back over to me. Thank you, Kevin. Let's take control here. Okay, so third part of our triangle model is supplementing with portable air cleaners. So now this is a huge topic. That's why we've dedicated an hour for it in 2 weeks. So this will be a little bit of a ridiculously short flyover, but just cover a few points here since it's one of the important tools we have in the strategy. Really quickly, just how these things work fundamentally. It's kind of neat. We're able to, we've been doing HEPA filtration for decades at our company, and these are a great way to bring HEPA level filtration, out of the hospitals and clean rooms and laboratories and all that kind of stuff, and bring that technology into spaces like schools and offices. So a really great tool that we have, and effectively they supplement your building filtration with a portable unit, a piece of equipment that just pulls the air in from usually all sides, pulls it in and passes it through multiple layers of filtration. So these will have actually much better filtration inside these units than you're going to have in your central system. So they're great supplementary tools to to add to the mix to get to our 6 air changes per hour. They can also be used, the fourth bullet there is just, they can be used to create beneficial airflow patterns. So that's the other thing. Sometimes air can get stagnant in spaces, and you'll get corners where it's just dead, or you're only getting airflow through half the room. So with proper placement of these things, we can actually create some beneficial airflows. You got to be careful. You can create some detrimental airflows as well, but they're also good tools for that. And the last point here, just they're most of these are portable units, so they're great flexible units, and you can use them in different spaces. And even after COVID, they're very effective on any airborne virus, colds, flus, all that, and they're great for filtering out many more contaminants out of the air. So really flexible units. They're portable. You can move them to different spaces when you need it, or if you've got higher occupant loads, or you're putting lots of kids in different spaces or into gyms to write exams, they can be moved and redeployed into the area. So they're great flexible units. Again, they add to your, to get to our 6 air changes per hour, they're additive. So we use them as a tool to get extra filtration. And like I said, that's a really short sort of overview. There are some there's a lot of gotchas with them. You got to be careful about how they're sized. You want to be looking at your individual spaces as well. Just, they are in-room technology, so you need to be assessing not just the building, but you have to be assessing each space to size them properly, and there's calculations. So we're going to get into all of that on January 27th. I know this is really hot. This has really heated up the last even week or two. If anyone needs assistance with these before January 27th, reach out. We're happy to help out with this. But okay, so we're moving into a section we just call final thoughts. Kevin, I'll get you to put your camera back on. You got the first couple here, and then we'll kind of back and forth on this stuff here.
Yeah, I get to go on a soapbox a little bit because there's some things that are near and dear to my heart. But again, IAQ has been the most important organizational health and safety issue since the pandemic. It's interesting how the topics of energy savings and that has gone out the window, and we're now more worried, which makes all kinds of sense about health and safety in a building. The increased awareness for IAQ will not diminish, but will become the new benchmark. So as Ian was saying earlier, we're going to see those higher ventilation rates, and we're going to see higher filtration, and it's going to be really hard to go back to what it was before. The strategies discussed today and the next 2 weeks can be expensive, but the real costs are not in implementing them. The step taken today to improve IAQ will enhance your building, providing a better learning and working environment for everybody. An unprecedented amount of money and tax incentives are being allocated for the replacement and upgrading of aged HVAC equipment. I think if I asked the audience today, what's the average age of your HVAC equipment, we'd probably find that a tremendous amount of the inventory is well past its best before date, to put it nicely. So in the upcoming years, we're going to see a lot of money being spent on replacement. But we have a unique opportunity to participate in the growth, but also a responsibility to ensure the filtration and ventilation is designed, installed, and maintained to withstand any future extraordinary events. And extraordinary events, we're in one right now, the pandemic. But in Western Canada, we have had extraordinary events for the last 7 years with wildfire smoke. Wouldn't it be nice if we over-designed a system where we could increase the ventilation if required? We weren't always running max. Wouldn't it be nice if we had 2 air filter banks that we could slip in a carbon filter during wildfire smoke and get rid of some of the odor before it went into space? Right now, there's not a system that I know that has those capabilities. But we can do that, and when we need to do that is during design, construction, and get it done at those points. Oh.
It's
You
back
took my
level,
line.
right?
Because
What's
it'd be a shame. It'd be really shame, and this is my last point here, if we have the same conversation 20 years from now. And I'll get off my soapbox.
It's a good soapbox. We've definitely heard it before, and we got good opportunity to fix that going forward. And we'll grab this back here. Okay, just rounding the corner here, and then we'll get to Q&A. So just we put this one together. Just where do you begin? It's a lot of information, and certainly after, for those of you coming to webinar number 2 and 3 in a couple of weeks, there'll be a lot of information to take on. But I want to try and give you one tool as a way to think about this a little bit. So we call this is our it's called a management framework. We call it IAQ 360. You can adopt your own version, but it's fairly simple, right? It all starts it starts in the top left there with inspection and assessment. You need to understand where you're at today, and so we've talked about those 3 principles. But to go to work on ventilation, filtration, room air cleaners, all that, you need to understand where you're at today, what kind of air changes per hour you're getting in both your building as a whole and in different spaces, and inspecting your systems, and just we can help make baseline indoor air quality measures to find any problem areas. So you want to get a start and get started somewhere. Then from that, and based on that inspection and that assessment and where you are today, you create a plan. So you want to go to work on this stuff over time. There's no silver bullets. You can't solve it all immediately. So putting it all down and writing it down and getting a plan together and prioritizing the areas of highest priority, and then start working. Number 3 is deliver. So start working away on it and fixing the issues that you found in your assessment, and go to work. And then ongoing, just continue. You're checking things off the list, but these are mechanical systems. They're under constant movement. They're always changing. Your spaces are changing, and things inside your space are changing. So you have to stay on top of it and continue to assess and sort of loop it back around. So it's a bit of a framework. There's and just remember, this is a layered approach over time. This model we've given you is you got to go to work on this sequentially, and it is layered. So we always just recommend go at it with again this layered approach and over time. And speaking of time, you're going to have to buy some time. Unfortunately, that's difficult, and schools aren't unique. We do a lot of work in commercial spaces, and we got employees coming back asking lots of questions. What are you doing about MERV 13, and why don't we have air cleaners? Well, I know schools are under the same questions now. I just this morning did a quick Google search for ventilation schools Alberta, so just Alberta, and there were 14,000 news results. So I mean, this is everywhere. So you're getting asked a lot of questions, and we understand that. So it's really important. You're going to have to buy time, because you can't do this all overnight. And so, we suggest to buy time is just about communication. So communicate now early about what your plan is, what you've done already. I know a lot of schools have already started down this path, and so just getting out there and getting in front of the communication, because I think people are patient, but they need to understand that you're working on it, right? And so hopefully some of the tools today, we've given you some ways to help communicate that. Go to work on your list after you've completed this, and then as you're moving through time and you're making improvements, just communicate. And I can't stress that enough, is just communicate and over communicate, and communicate your progress as you go. And there's lots of tools available out there for this. Obviously the information and sources from today, that Healthy Buildings Toolkit, really I strongly suggest you to look there. They've got lots of great tools to help. And your peers, we're seeing some excellent examples. Roberta and I, our own kids, just got a communication from the school board about ventilation and what they're doing. So, talk to each other. There's templates, there's example emails, there's things out there to give you ideas. Best in class, I would call it, we've seen out there. The University of Alberta has an excellent page. I mean, they have a huge HVAC team, and they've got a lot more resources than many of you have, but just great ideas of the things you could communicate, the types of things that people want to know. It's an excellent resource. So there's just one, sort of example if you want some ideas. So with that, I think we're wrapped, Kevin and Roberta. So we'll get your mics back on. I guess last message before we take questions, we are here to help. This is obviously we're very passionate about this. Many of our employees have schools in your facilities, so please reach out if you have questions. We love to share information and provide guidance as much as we can. And again, one quick reminder for the next webinar. It's coming up in a week, so they're once a week. So the next one is 20th and then the 27th. And we will go to Q&A. So I saw the first one, so I'll maybe just kind of field the questions, and Roberta and Kevin, you can go. The first one there is from Abby. I manage a community center *2 and want to know if there are any discounts for not-for-profit organizations for air purifiers. Roberta, yeah, and I have a thought there.
Sure. Abby, I think probably the best thing to do is that we'll have one of our clean air advisors reach out to you. And one of the things we really like to work with is really understanding, like we said, every situation is unique. And so we want to make sure that we're going to give you the right solution and find something that works within your budgetary constraints. Kevin always says, we'll never sell you more and we'll never sell you less. We'll sell you what you need and make sure that you've got a solution going forward. So we'll make sure that we reach out to you at the end of this seminar, and we can talk to you about specific pricing and how we can meet your budget expectations.
Thank you. I'll mention too, there is, and I'm seeing lots of traction, and there are going to be test results, my understanding on this in 2 or 3 weeks, but there's actually, there's DIY solutions, and a friend of ours in Texas named Jim Rosenthal, and he's a NAFA member and filtration guy. But there's a Google Corsi Rosenthal box, CORSI, and Rosenthal ROSENTHAL. So it's relatively low cost. You take 4 MERV 13 filters and a fan, and we have to be careful as HVAC professionals. They're not something that we yet know the effectiveness, but something to keep an eye on. And we think they're a great idea. They're a good interim solution, and they're certainly low cost. That might be something else to check out too. Next question is, from Marina, are the 6 air changes per hour with or without masks? Anybody want to take a run at that?
I think you would mask her for, just close distances. We're talking about the building, the inside envelope itself, and 6 air changes is the target. And I know, as I mentioned earlier, with your inventory of buildings, mechanically it's going to be really difficult to get the 6 air changes. It's going to be a tough goal for some of them. But masks should really have no bearing on trying to provide that 6 air changes an hour.
And I do know that the masks are a very important layer. So they do absorb a lot of those aerosols we showed. So if you have the mask on, it's going to reduce the concentration in the air. So that's a very important point. So good layer, and the 6, and then I will say the research, they are saying that everybody who's recommending the 6 also recommends, before all these things, also very highly supportive of masks. So it is a layered strategy, and 6 is considering masks as well. Okay, I'll just flag it. We are approaching 12 o'clock, so if anyone, we totally understand if anybody needs to go, but there's a few more good questions. And again, this is recorded, so we'll keep answering questions for probably another at least 10 minutes. But if you need to drop off, please do.
Yeah, Ian,
Okay.
just before you go off the masks, Marina just had a follow-up question, which is probably just good to answer right afterwards. She asks, do you know if the guide was trying to eliminate the need for masks?
No.
Absolutely not.
No, definitely not.
There's still close contact. You're going to want that in an enclosed space, and even with 6 air changes, you won't get. There's still going to be. There still could be, and there will be, particulate being resuspended back into the space through the mechanical system, and even through a room air purifier with a HEPA filter. They're not absolute, so the masks are really important until we get, outside of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to say is if we get outside this pandemic and we get to this world where we can interact with each other in these spaces without masks, that 6 air changes is still going to be the best strategy going forward if we think of all those other contaminants that can have poor effects on indoor air quality.
Next question is from Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Nice to see you here. On buying time, what immediate mitigation actions can schools take while these improvements are ongoing? So for immediate mitigation actions can schools take while these improvements are ongoing? Anybody want to?
Yeah, I think the first step, like we say, one of the things we've been hearing is that, like Kevin and Ian were talking about with that inverted pyramid, is that you can't just do one of these things. You have to go in a methodology of this process. And so the very first thing and the immediate action that should be taken is going and assessing your schools and assessing each individual classroom and seeing how you can identify, your HVAC systems performance. That's the immediate action that needs to be put in place with a plan going forward. Because what we see is some different school boards or different people that are interpreting all of this information, they're jumping to one solution, and not only one solution is going to do the trick.
Is David Turner, is UV technology being considered? I can touch on that one, and we will definitely cover that in a little bit in a week, and then in particular on the third webinar about room air cleaners. Yes, UV is very widely accepted. It's also recommended by ASHRAE as an additional technology that works quite well. There's two things I think you're probably talking about. The portable room air purifiers, a number of them have even additional layers of, we talked about how those machines have multiple layers of filtration. Many of them also have UV bulbs inside them, so you'll pass through 3, sometimes 4 layers of filtration, and then you'll pass through the light beam, for lack of a better word, of UV, and so any virus that may pass through that, will get neutralized. It's also pretty good having a bulb in there that, because the filters are capturing virus, and so that bulb inside those units will also neutralize the virus instead of just capturing it. And then the second UV technology, again, they're not. We are seeing some facilities install them, but it's called upper room UV. We're not seeing specific recommendations. The ASHRAE guidance isn't. They believe the technology works, but we believe it works. But it's basically, you got to be careful with UV light. It's harmful if you get direct exposure to it. But they can install units up higher on the ceilings that point up, and they essentially fire UV light up into the ceiling, and it neutralizes any viruses in that upper air chamber of the room. So, we think it's good technology. ASHRAE is not specifically pushing it very much, but it's definitely an option worth considering. We will talk about it in webinar number 3.
And the
Electrostatic.
third item with UV is also right, and you might be asking right on the air handling system too, which is usually put downstream of the coil,
Yes.
which ends up being a major retrofit of a unit. And at the end of the day, retrofitting a unit that's 15 to 20 years old, that's again probably past its best before date, is you'd have to look at the cost benefit of doing something like that. So.
We do know it works in all of those instances.
Technology.
Good, well-proven technology. Has been around for a long, long time, well tested. What about Kevin or Roberta? What about electrostatic filters? Chris has a question there.
You talk about electrostatic like in a air handling system, or
you may have to talk of the different variety of electrostatic filters, because there's not all are made equal.
Yeah, and electronic filters, I mean, it again, in an air handling system or in a residence where you're using an ionizing section to charge the air or charge the particles, and then a collection section. It's a proven technology. The biggest, issues with electronic filters was the maintenance of it. It really required a lot of maintenance, a lot of cleaning, and we probably replaced more commercially than we installed new. If that makes any sense. Like, they were just, again, the concept's really, really good, but they're really a maintenance nightmare. That type of filter. I'm not sure if you're talking about electronics as in like the ionization, bipolar ionization and that type of thing, but I know there was another question that came across.
Maybe what we can do is reach out to Chris to really get specific about exactly the type of filters that he's looking at, and we can have one of our clean air advisors help him in detail with that question.
And then Tyson Robertson, there's a two-part question here. So the first one, well, maybe we'll just do the first one and then we'll go to the second one. So are you suggesting that a new build should be designed for 6 air changes per hour average or peak capacity? Kevin, any thoughts on that one? Or that's your soapbox one.
Yeah. Again, we'd like to, I personally would like to see that a building or units are built with some excess capacity on it so that you can ramp them up. And everything we talked about today, the acceptable indoor air quality, minimum ventilation size, they're always at the low end. So buildings tend to get built by that medium or the minimum. How about if we actually had something, and I was thinking about this yesterday. I was doing it. Yeah, I got a car that goes 200 kilometers an hour, but it doesn't mean I have to drive it at, I'd like to drive it at 200 kilometers an hour. If I had a system that supplied, or the capability of supplying 20,000 CFM, if I didn't have to run it at 20,000 CFM, that would be great. If I could run it at 10 most of the time, but be able to ramp it up when I really needed it, would that not be a really great feature? And if I did it when we're replacing units, or I did it during construction, the cost of doing these things is minuscule compared to trying to retrofit a unit now with UV or extra filter bank or oversize it. It is really, really difficult to do that, and so costly.
I'll mention too that webinar the podcast episode with the chair of the ASHRAE Epidemic Task Force. He actually gets asked that question quite a bit. Of course, I mean, ASHRAE is obviously looking at standards, and will, the next permanent ventilation standard go up, from what it is today. So he does have some commentary on there. I mean, obviously ASHRAE's got to be careful about those positions because they don't know what the end result will be post-pandemic. But, all the tea leaves we're reading is certainly going to say that, design standards are going to go up. I can't imagine we're going to go backwards on this, and there'll be a lot of pressure. So, but you can hear some more on that with the experts in that area. The second part of Tyson's question was, this will be probably good for Kevin or Roberta. In addition to MERV 13 at 6 air changes per hour, you also mentioned double filtration for smoke as an example. what is the MERV design rating across 2 filters, i.e. carbon MERV 8 plus a MERV 13 simultaneously? That is the premium on a system to that level. So what is the MERV design rating across 2 filters?
So if
MERV 8
yeah, if you have the ability to put, like Kevin said, 2 stages of filtration, meaning that you can put, necessarily a pre-filter, or like he said, a carbon filter for fire or forest fires, and then you also have a second stage of filtration. What we call that, if you've got a MERV 8 and you've got a MERV 13, you actually have a MERV 13 system. So it's not 8 plus 13, it is the highest efficiency in that set. And this is something we've talked about for many, many years. If you can get your system designed that you have more room so that you can put in a thicker filter, or you can put in multiple stages of filters, it gives you tremendous flexibility for a number of situations, including, like Kevin said, forest fires. Anything you want to add to that, Kevin?
No, and it's a really good point. I think everyone can visualize their home furnace, and I just replaced mine last year, and I went from a 2-inch slot to a 6-inch slot, which opened up a world of opportunities for me in filtration. I could go to a MERV 13 filter. I could oversize it so that I slow the air down as it goes through the square footage of media. So the pressure differential on it is a lot less than if I tried to stick a MERV 13 into a 1 or 2-inch slot. So even with the group we have here, there's probably 10 or 20 of you are going to replace a furnace in the next 2 or 3 years. Get your sheet metal guy just to make a bigger box. And you'll get all the advantages of a higher efficient filter without the impact of it'll burn your motor out. It'll shoot your eye out.
We got a few more good ones here. We'll try and get to these. So Jerry, is bipolar ionization, I'm assuming, being considered an approved air purification strategy? Roberta, your NAFA group's doing lots of discussion on this one. Do you want to take that
Yeah.
one?
I think again, if we go back to what we talked about today, if you follow the inverted pyramid, those are the generally well accepted principles that people like Harvard and ASHRAE can confirm. Bipolar ionization has been around for a while. There have been some technologies that have introduced additional contaminants into the space, and ASHRAE is encouraging that technology to work with ASHRAE to come up with a standard so that we can really make sure that that is a proven technology going forward. We do know that there are people that are advising it. I think the first steps, though, are looking at your ventilation, improving your filtration, and then you can look at those supplemental technologies. Just make sure that you're working with somebody that has, proper certification and standards around that technology to support you.
Yeah, and ASHRAE does have some position documents on that, both in the epidemic task force, all the literature. I'll try and pull the link and send it off. If I don't get it by the end of this in the chat, we can email it to you.
And a lot of the guidance is do your due diligence. There's not a lot of third-party peer review on BPI yet, and there might be going forward, but do your due diligence. There's tons on mechanical filtration and UV and that type of thing. So
yeah, we have seen
this.
Yeah, we have seen, especially in the last 3 or 4 months in particular, in some of these suppliers of, and manufacturers of this technology, that they are working hard to get more studies, independent studies, and getting those peer reviewed so that we have more knowledge and more comfort with that technology.
Okay, here's one in our, we get lots. On a standard commercial RTU, is MERV 13 too restrictive?
Could very well be, but some of the guidance out there is to use the highest MERV filter that you can. So if it right now using a MERV 8, maybe try a MERV 11, monitor it, and then MERV 13. I think you'd probably find that, especially in an RTU, when you slide in, say, 6 or 8 filters, there's going to be, it's probably not going to be a MERV 13 system anyway, just because of the gaps, unless you tape or caulk the filters. So I would I'd suggest maybe incrementally trying, higher a MERV until maybe you get to the MERV 13, but monitor it very closely.
Surely portable air filter positioning can have a significant impact on capturing live aerosol droplets as soon as they are emitted. Yes. So that's an interesting question. On our third webinar, we're going to talk about airflows and positioning of those units. In an ideal world, you'd actually put a room air cleaner.
You're cutting out.
Often multiple units versus, say, multiple smaller units versus one big one is a good strategy, because you can, if you do need to put them off to the sides, you can position them, sort of center one way in the room, and you got 2 of them, and so they draw air into them for the most part, so you can get some pretty good airflows going. But yes, positioning is very important on that, and there's some decent information we'll cover in a couple of weeks on that.
And just to reiterate, again, because Paul did follow up with just a comment, as opposed to broad brush air changes per hour. Remember, as we showed how airborne this virus can be and suspended, and if we think about those other contaminants, we really need to look at those together. So you do want to improve your overall ventilation as much as possible, but we do know there are limitations to that. So I think you want to make sure that you're working with these 2 in concert together, not just one or the other.
Yeah, and you don't want them fighting each other either. You're going to have, assuming you do have supply and return into the room, you will have airflow patterns already there, so you don't want them fighting against each other either. So yeah, that's a really good point, Paul. Michelle, oh no, let's just thank you for your information. Localized positioning of, oh, that was Paul's follow-up. Mohammed, no question. Do you have Charles, do you have a tool I can buy to start measuring where we are with our air quality before we improve what we have? So yes, there's various tools. We're going to cover some of them in number 2 and 3. I apologize, these are complicated questions sometimes. But I mean, a couple of things. Certainly the indoor air quality monitors, the 24/7 IAQ monitors, have come a long way, and they've dropped significantly in cost. The Harvard link that I gave you, there's a tool in there that allows you to use CO2 measures as essentially a proxy for ventilation. It's not perfect, but it's a pretty good assessment. So you put a CO2 monitor in there. You keep an eye on levels. You need to understand what occupancy you have in your room, but there's a calculator that essentially you can take those average CO2 ratings as you start to read them, and get a rough triangulation on how much ventilation you might have in that space, or air changes per hour coming from your HVAC. The one caveat on that you got to be careful is, remember, if you do things like, especially with room air cleaners nothing can filter out CO2. So you could put in a really powerful, air purification unit. You've done the job. You're cleaning the air really well in there, but your CO2 is going to still be high. So that's one little caveat on that tool. There's also, there's airflow meters to check how much CFMs you coming out of ducts. There's all kinds of different things. So we can follow up on that if you'd like later. Anything else, Kevin or Roberta, on that?
You know, if Marina was still on, I know Keith and Marina used to do a ton of CO2 counts in the CBE, and I'm not sure if they still do that. And again, using those numbers compared to that chart that you're talking about would give an idea of assimilated air changes per hour. So.
Michelle was late getting on and asked if it's recorded. Yes, it is recorded, and we will be sending it out to all the participants, so you'll have it pretty soon here. I think, you guys see any more? Paul? Okay, we'll do this one as the last one, and then we'll let everybody go here. Why focus on HVAC filtration, as this may affect the reliability of the fans? Anybody looked at dry hydrogen peroxide technology introduced into the ducting to destroy viruses and bacteria? Interesting. Paul or Kevin, any thoughts on that one?
No. I haven't heard that one.
Peroxide.
I mean, there is a lot of technology out there. I'd have to see the science behind it. You know, for one thing, but you know, Roberta had a really good slide right at the start about you know, yes, we're going to stop or try to stop or remove or eliminate as much as we can of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, but it also has great effect on all the other particulate that affects people and asthmatics and that type of thing. So mechanical filtration is a proven technology. And if you can't do MERV 13, then go up to the highest one that you can. And there's lots of products available, MERV 10, MERV 11. I'm not sure we do MERV 12, but those are incremental increases in filter performance, but also in probably pressure drop. The pressure drop increase would be minuscule, and most systems would be able to handle it.
Yeah, and Paul just had a follow-up comment saying HEPA filters put stress on existing fans. We're not saying that we put HEPA filters in the HVAC systems. We absolutely realize that. So like Kevin said, I mean, if we have an opportunity where the school was designed for 2 stages of filtration with a proper, you know, MERV 13 even to MERV 15 final filter, you're in a great situation. But like Kevin said, if we can only get to MERV 11 or just a MERV 13, you know, 2-inch or 4-inch filter, then we would supplement with a room air purifier with a HEPA filter, but we don't recommend putting HEPA filters inside your HVAC system. You are right, it will put tremendous stress on those existing fans. And again, as you upgrade your filtration with an older system, you really do have to be, that's why we're saying it's important that you're consulting with your HVAC professionals or your engineer that's helping you understand how your fans are sized, how your system's sized, and what resistance to airflow can you handle as you increase the efficiency of filtration. So as much as that inverted triangle looks very simple, all these steps require a lot of assessment and getting advice from those professionals that can help you navigate this tremendous challenge that is in front of all of you today.
All right, and I actually, one of our other presenters who's presenting in the next 2 weeks here, Patrick, our colleague, he's our engineer on staff. He did have his hand up. Patrick, I think Laura turned your mic on if you did want to comment on anything here. But if not, then we can wrap up. No, doesn't sound like Patrick was able to connect. Okay. All right, well, with that, everyone, thanks. That was a great Q&A session. Went well over time, but some of you hung in there. So thank you very much for your time, and look forward to seeing some of you in a week again. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.